So thank you so much, She Geeks Out, for having me today. Thank you, Lauren, for the intro, and thank you, Rachel, as well. It is so fun to be here. I have been a long-term fan of She Geeks Out, and I'm just so thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with some of you today about what is really, I think, a pervasive issue for a lot of us. So we're going to spend some time today talking about what the new normal really looks like. And specifically for all of us, what are some things that we can do to cultivate a bit of resilience? I will tell you, I work on it every day. So it is a struggle for all of us. So we're going to talk a little bit about the pace of change. We're going to quickly pivot and talk about what burnout looks like, what it sounds like, not really what it smells like, but just sort of what is it, and how can you be on the lookout for it? Both in yourself and in those that you love and you work with. We're going to talk about the power of vulnerability and specifically how that can really help you deepen your sense, sort of your internal compass and your own sense of inner resilience. And then my last bullet here is just control. So we are going to focus on what you can control and what you can't control. So I will not promise you that by the end of this, you will have a firm sense of what you can control, not control, but I will at least leave you with a tool that you can use as you wish. So there's some really, really interesting research out there. I'm not kidding you when I tell you that I've probably come across about 20 really interesting articles. A lot of people are writing about this sense of just unprecedented change, both the accelerated sort of pace of change and just the large scale impacts that we're all experiencing. I think a lot of us have sort of been on the wheel for a while and really felt like it got just ridiculously accelerated in 2020. If we think about just the nature of the global pandemic and how quickly all of us were sort of forced to start, in many cases, working from home, the shifts and the risks that essential workers had to go through to be navigating those environments. If we think about the economic crisis and how many folks actually lost their jobs in record time. And then obviously there's been a lot of social unrest and there's been a lot going on that has really been tugging at us. If you add into that the complexity of tech innovation and what companies have been having to do to really be pushing, if we think about technology like what we're using right now, these events sure will be in person again and used to be in person. And right now they're on this really cool technology. I was just in a breakout room with a few people and we were saying it almost feels just like networking, right? Like you're just right in front of people. So, and with that, companies have had to really be thinking about their business models and pivoting to a brand new way of operating. And I think that is talked about a lot, but I can't really underscore enough how much businesses have had to really change the way that they do business. And the ones that have emerged, we see and we hear and we know. And unfortunately, some others have sort of been left behind if they've been able to make those changes. And then obviously there's so much at the forefront right now when we talk about societal inequality. There's been some amazing movements and some great discussions that have come up and some great action planning. But all of that is to say, it all tugs at us, right? It all pulls at us and sort of pulls our attention in a variety of places. The last piece in here, and I know this is something that I personally have been struggling with, is we have this sense of, okay, the vaccine is coming, right? Or, yay, I got my first shot, or my parents got vaccinated, or whatever the case may be. And yay, my office is going to reopen at some point. There are all these things that we're all sort of dealing with. I think for those of us who have small children, we're also navigating what if my kids actually are back in school 5 days a week, and what impact will that have? And there's just sort of this constant barrage of excitement and this sense of, I just want it to be done. I'm so excited we've made it through this. But also coming with that is a real sense of deep fatigue. And, I was on a call a couple of nights ago with a couple of parents, and I realized that I was having a really tough time making a decision about something that a year ago, I probably could have just said, let's do it that way. But I almost sort of frozen in this sense of like, what's it going to mean? And what's the impact on me? And what's it going to mean for my kids? And, so I think that's how it's been showing up for me, is sort of this sense of brain freeze, like I have to make another decision. So let's talk about burnout is. I think most of us, we see it in the news, we hear about it. It's been named as an actual condition by the World Health Organization. But when we talk about burnout, in the context of today, we're really talking about a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. Now, some of you might be like, okay, yep, I get it. Sure. What I really like about this definition is excessive and prolonged stress. So if we think about it in terms of some of the research that's out there around burnout, most people, when they reach a point of burnout, it's not this one cataclysmic thing that happens, the car accident, the lost job, the whatever the case may be that sort of uproots you. It's a series of really small pieces that chip away and chip away and chip away. And so some of the research that's out there around burnout, and I have some of it at the end linked, and I'd be happy to share some additional resources if you're interested. Some of what I learned when I was studying about burnout was that a lot of what's going on with burnout right now is it's the fact that it's been going on for so long. And it's this sort of pervasive sense of every day feels the same, but not, and there's a lot to manage. And back to that earlier slide, if you think about it from sort of an external perspective, there are a lot of sort of societal things coming at us on top of the personal nature. And so when we start to feel a sense of burnout, and we'll talk about what that looks like in a second, that's really what we mean, is just sort of this constant state, cumulative, building up until we really hit that place of exhaustion. I think I mentioned this a minute ago that the World Health Organization has actually named burnout syndrome. They did so in 2019. And I think that's hilarious because I kind of wonder what they would call it now. Like, I feel like people's sense of burnout is so much more extensive than probably how I would have named it in 2019. It needs a new word. But when we think about what this actually sounds like, so think about this in terms of yourself and maybe what you're saying, inside your own brain, or what you're hearing your colleagues say around you, or what you're hearing your direct reports say. Some of the things that we're hearing are, I'm just so tired. This real sense of exhaustion and almost brain fog, a sense of hopelessness. So some folks will say things like, nothing I do at work matters anymore. So this sense of like, I don't know what the impact is that I can make anymore. I used to feel like I was really good at my job, and now I'm not. It comes up a lot of times as sort of questioning oneself. So why can't I handle it? Like, why can't I handle it? I'm working from home, right? Like I'm working from home. I'm just doing my thing. Everybody got to school okay. There are groceries in the fridge. Like, everything's going okay. But this sense of like, oh, I can't. And then this real sense of hopelessness in terms of, I just see no end in sight. And this one, I think, really is one that I've been hearing, at least in my life, from folks that I speak with, because there's this sense of lack of control in terms of what we can handle and what we can't handle. A lot of folks are feeling like there's a lot sort of coming at us, and not a lot that we can actually mitigate and do something with. And so I think one of the things that people are struggling with is, for those of you who are control freaks or even just like to manage things, we like to have a sense of, this is what I'm marching towards. So I'm marching towards that date, or I'm marching towards sort of that proverbial milestone. And when we don't have that, it can really start to lead to a sense of burnout in folks, where they really start to feel a sense of hopelessness. So with that, I want you to just going to pause for a minute. And I know this isn't interactive, but I do want you to just think for a minute and reflect on these questions that I have pulled up. The Mayo Clinic has done a really nice job of pulling together a few really easy questions for you to ask yourself. I've also used this with friends and colleagues, but it's a really easy way for you to just sort of check in with yourself. So I'm just going to give you a moment to look at the questions. I'm going to be quiet for a few seconds, and I'm just going to allow you to look at them and check in with yourself. So how many of these would you say yes to, or maybe sometimes, or never? I know the first time I did this, I was like, yep, absolutely, sure, okay. Humor aside, I think this list, is really comprehensive. It's a comprehensive list of questions. I think a lot of us are dealing with this. I also think one of the interesting things came up in one of our discussions at Brightcove was we talked about disillusionment. So a lot of the ways that it comes up for folks when they're feeling really burnt out, at work is sort of that sense that I mentioned before about I don't really know what my impact can be. Like I'm feeling like sort of just like I'm doing the work and I'm doing the work and I'm doing the work, but I'm not really seeing what the impact is overall. That one came up largely in some of our discussions. And what I found really interesting about it is that a lot of times it came up because of the fact that folks felt that they weren't tethered to one another because of the fact that they were remote, if that makes any sense. So because we're sort of behind this computer screen all day, there was a sense of I'm only really talking to people through my computer screen and not having any human interaction. Okay, so let's not just dwell on what it looks like and what it sounds like. Let's talk a little bit about now what. I will tell you when I first was through the list of what to focus on to sort of cure or help with burnout, I laughed at a couple of these because, to be honest with you, it was like somebody telling me to take a rest. Okay, like I want to. I really do want to take a nap. But some of these are really getting at the heart of what it means to be a human and thinking about just the pause of the day, the pause of the month, the pause of the year, whatever the case may be, what it is that can fill your cup. Playing outside in the snow, making sure you take a 10-minute walk. I know for those of you who are in New England, vitamin D is really important. We don't get enough of it. So even just getting outside for 10 minutes in between meetings and getting some sun on your face can really make a big difference. But really important to be thinking about what are the things that you can build in here to give yourself a break. I've talked to a few folks around the fact that they don't feel like they can take time off for a couple of reasons. One, their jobs are taxing and big, right? And two, they feel like, what am I going to do? I'm not going to go anywhere. Like if it's a pandemic, it's not like I'm going to get on a plane and go to California or go to Aruba or any of the places that I really feel like will fuel me. But just taking that time anyway, and maybe taking a day trip or maybe reading a book, right? Maybe just doing something that brings you out of your space is really, really important. A couple of the other ones on here that I just want to highlight is sort of setting boundaries and managing technology. There was a really interesting report on the news the other day about Zoom fatigue. And I sometimes laugh at those broadcasts and articles, to be honest with you, because Zoom fatigue is real. Sure, we're on Zoom all day, but there's not that much I can control about that because I'm in meetings for a lot of the day and I have my camera on, and I like having my camera on because I like connecting with folks, particularly because I've been onboarding remotely. It's a way for me to get to know people. But somebody shared a tidbit that I thought was a really good one, and you might all know it. And if you know it, just blow up the chat and say, Sarah, we already know this one. But somebody said to just really, really, really minimize your Zoom screen to be teeny tiny. So if somebody isn't sharing a presentation, if all you're doing is having sort of a conversation back and forth with one other person or with several, just make your really, really small. And it actually can have a really powerful effect on the extent to which your brain feels taxed and your eyes. So I haven't tried it yet, but I thought it was a really good tip. So if any of you have tried it, yeah. I just saw somebody, Anitha, it helps not to see yourself on the video, 150%. Actually, that was a really important point. Thank you for that. That was a really important point that came up in that broadcast, was talking about how we're actually not used to looking at ourselves. If you think about how you were in an office setting, right? If we had spinach stuck in our teeth, we relied on a coworker to say, hey, Sarah, you have spinach stuck in your teeth. And now we're just on camera all day. So yes, I use that one quite frequently. I don't generally try to have my face on camera. That's a great one. Thank you. So that's burnout. So feel free, again, I have all these resources linked. Feel free to use that checklist with yourself, with your loved ones, with your colleagues. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about vulnerability. And in the spirit of transparency, I will tell you that I, in professional life, do not come from a history of talking about vulnerability. My professional experience has been very church and state. So what I mean by that is I've been doing this work in the leadership space for a long time. I've been doing this leadership work with leaders at all levels in different industries. And vulnerability didn't come up most of the time until I started working at Brightcove. The first couple of times that it came up in discussion, I was really caught off guard. And not in a bad way. I have loved Brene Brown. I have loved work about vulnerability and shame for years. It's something that I read about and I think about a lot. And I try to cultivate in my personal life. I just didn't know that it could actually exist in a professional setting. And what I have found so powerful about this is having the ability to be vulnerable, and we'll talk a little bit about what this looks like, can really deepen one's ability to just say, I'm struggling. What are we going to do about it? Just that simple, I'm struggling. Here's how I'm struggling. What am I going to do about it? Can really be powerful. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Brene Brown's work. If you're not, there are 1,050 ways you can learn about her. She has a really fantastic podcast, actually 2 podcasts. Her Dare to Lead podcast, which is her new one, is really phenomenal. And she's the author of several books. But for those of you from a professional context who are trying to sort of integrate some of this work, her Dare to Lead book is a really fantastic resource and a really nice way to sort of weave some of that work in. So if you're interested and you haven't read it, I implore you to. One of my favorite quotes of hers is, vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. I think it's a really important thing to think about what that actually is saying, right? So a lot of us walk around work, myself included, with a lot of armor on, right? So I have sort of a lens that I want people to be thinking about me, a context that I want people to be thinking about me in, a level of competence that I want them to associate my work with. That doesn't always look like my saying, I'm having a really tough day, right? So what I love about this quote, and I refer to this quite frequently in my personal life, is it's just a good reminder that it's not weakness. It's actually a form of strength to be able to say to a colleague, to a boss, to a direct report, to a friend, whomever, I'm really struggling, right? Or I'm just not feeling it today. What can we do to get through this? So most of you probably in New England love lobsters. I don't know if you know how lobsters grow. So this is the educational portion of the session. But if we think about vulnerability in the context of a lobster, which I'm sure all of you are just really itchy to know about, when lobsters are growing, their shells get really tight. And what happens, what the lobster does, which I think is so fascinating, is the lobster knows instinctively to go hide somewhere. So the lobster will go scurry under a couple of rocks, remove its shell, and then wait until it grows a new shell, which I just think is fascinating, that lobsters have the instinct to do that, right? So they know that what they need to do is to go shield themselves until they're ready to be more visible again, until they have their armor picked up. So I just love thinking about us all in the context of, we are all kind of lobsters, right? We're all sort of growing, developing, and we have that physical discomfort sometimes if something needs to change. And it's okay to sort of go and protect yourself until you build a new shell and you emerge again. And I thought I would throw this other Brene quote in here. You can choose courage or you can choose comfort. You cannot have both. So if you think about that in the context of the lobster, from a pure physical perspective, right? That lobster is very courageous because he is, or she, or any others are uncomfortable, right? It's an uncomfortable specimen. The shell is getting too tight and all it knows is to go and hide until it grows a new shell. So I want to do a quick vulnerability check-in again. This is a time for you to reflect for a minute and think about these questions. So I am going to give you a minute to do this. I grew up believing that vulnerability was, and I want you to think about what you grew up believing that vulnerability was. Vulnerability feels like, for me physically. That should say me physically, not my. So when you're experiencing a sense of vulnerability, what does it physically manifest as? Vulnerability feels like, for me, emotionally. So when you're feeling vulnerable, What are some of the emotions that pop up for you? How can you identify that you're feeling very vulnerable? The last time you bravely faced some emotional exposure was when? So think about the last time that you were in a place where you felt some true emotional exposure, where you're either in a good way feeling like I'm seen, or in an uncomfortable way where you feel like, ooh, I'm feeling extremely vulnerable right now. And then the last question is, I now believe that vulnerability is what? So the reason for this, and the reason why I have these questions here, and again, these will be available to you if you'd like to refer back to them. They are taken from Brene Brown. What I love about these questions is that it's really a powerful way for you to just quickly pause and say, what is going on, right? What is going on? So if vulnerability for you feels like your throat starts to tighten, it's really good to know that. If vulnerability emotionally feels like all I want to do is scream and yell at everybody who's around me, really good to know. I think it's also really important right now where a lot of people are feeling particularly down. Depression and anxiety are pretty rampant right now for a lot of folks. It's something people are really struggling with. I think it's also really important that people think about, when was the last time that I was brave? When was the last time that I had some sort of emotional experience that caused me to either feel proud of myself in the way that I handled it, to feel exposed because of the fact that I felt vulnerable and I didn't know how to deal with it, but just having that sense of humanity around what you're doing within the day-to-day and having that check-in can be important. The last question here is, I now believe that vulnerability is, and it's fill in the blank. The reason why I included that one here is the first question you see, it says, or the first statement is, I believing that vulnerability was. And the last one is, I now believe that vulnerability is. I think sometimes we get stuck in our minds and we go back, particularly when we're in a place of scarcity or we're not feeling safe and we are feeling vulnerable. We just go back to the way we were decades, years, I won't guess your ages, but a while ago, right? So it's important sometimes to just do this check-in with yourself and then to remind yourself. In my case, I now believe that vulnerability is strength. When I think about it in the context of work, and remember I said before, I've been very church and state my whole career. Brightcove, which I just joined 6 months ago, is the first organization in my nearly 44 years where I have worked where vulnerability is discussed at all levels in the organization. For me, when I say I now believe that vulnerability is a strength or is strength or however it manifests in my head, that's a reminder for me that my sense of vulnerability is different from what it used to be, and that it can really be used as a powerful tool in the workplace. So again, Brene Brown, wonderful material, wonderful applications for work. I can't speak highly enough about some of this work. Some vulnerability takeaways. We have the ability to shape the organizations we want to work in by showing up with our own courage. Having the bravery to raise your hand and ask for help is leadership. And demonstrating empathy with those around you who are struggling drives engagement. So having the ability to say to somebody, let's figure it out together, I can see you're struggling, is a really powerful engagement driver. Both if you're a manager, if you're a peer, doesn't matter. Asking somebody how they're doing before you jump into the work meeting, powerful engagement driver, right? So there are some really easy ways to weave vulnerability in to the workplace with the understanding that for many of us, it can be a really uncomfortable thing at first. I don't even think I honestly said the word vulnerability in a work setting until September, but I've really been starting to see the power of it. Okay, we're going to shift gears for our last minutes, and we're going to talk about resilience. So remember what I said about vulnerability. It can really be a powerful precursor to deepening your own sense of resilience. I know when I started reading and learning more about resilience, my initial understanding of it was, Sarah, the outcome that you're looking for is the ability to take on more. So you've developed resilience if you can take on more work, take on more personal responsibility, make sure that my kids love all of their birthday presents, all those things. If I've done all of those things, then I've really achieved some sense of resilience. That's not the case. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the really critical research that's been happening around resilience and grief, and some of the powerful lessons that we can apply. So I really love this definition of resilience. I define resilience as the ability to navigate adversity and to grow and thrive from challenges. Again, if there's one thing I want you to sort of think about and take away from today, it's just notion of self-reflection. I think it's really hard right now for people to just stop, right? To just stop and to just say, how am I? I know it sounds really simple, but just having the ability to stop and to say, how am I doing? How am I going to navigate this? And then really importantly, after I get through that, what did I learn? So a lot of us are going experiences right now in our companies where we're trying to help steer the ship or be part of the process to figure out what is work going to look like, right? What's the new normal? What is our working environment going to look like? Where are people going to be physically situated? Do we care if they're in an office? All those sorts of things. We have so much that we can learn about the strengths that we've developed over the last year in the ways that we get work done. So I worked in a lot of places for many years where there was this whole culture around, I don't know if it's okay if you can work from home. I don't know, like need to do it, but it just wasn't necessarily an embraced notion. We have proven that that model works, right? So what are the real lessons that we can take from that? And then from an emotional and personal level, how can we grow? So how can we become more effective employees, more engaged employees, better people, happier people, right? From the last year. And I feel really positively that there's a lot that we can learn from it. I hope some of you watched the Lucy Hone TED Talk. If you haven't watched it, just watch it or listen to it. It's like a 12 or 13 minute long TED Talk. I watched a lot of TED Talks in my life. I have to say this is like in my top 2 or 3. She is a researcher who has basically spent her career just doing research around well-being and resilience. And she has come up with 3 real keys that she calls them to developing resilience. And, just for purposes of illustration, for those of you who didn't listen to her talk, her whole work was centered around resilience. And then she was trying to apply what it was that she had learned when the earthquake happened in New Zealand about 10 years ago. And just around that same time, she tragically lost one of her children in an accident. Literally just one day it happened. And so what she describes in the TED Talk is suddenly being on the other side of grief and having to actually practice what it is that she had been doing all of her research on, but try to practice it in her daily life, which I don't know if any of you have ever had to do that. It sounds incredibly hard and painful to me. And I think the fact that she's come out of this with such strength and such resiliency and so many lessons, I think is really powerful. So her 3 keys, and we're going to go through each of them in just a moment, but resilient people know that suffering is part of everyone's human existence, are really good at choosing carefully where they select their attention, and ask themselves, is what I'm doing helping or harming me? So let's just go through each of these really quickly. So resilient people know that suffering is part of everyone's human existence. About 70% of adults in the United States experience some form of trauma at some point. So the large majority of folks in the US experience some sort of great trauma. Folks who are resilient don't tend to say, why me? They tend to have an understanding of bad things happen, right? They can also contextualize. So they're quickly able, or maybe in some cases, not so quickly able, but they can get to a place where they can root that suffering and that trauma in the context of greater humanity or the overall context that they're operating in. Resilient people are really good at choosing carefully where they select their attention. This one is fascinating. So if you think about how we're wired and how our brains are wired to think about ourselves from a defensive perspective, right? So our brains are actually wired to be thinking about threats and to be preventing us from going through into something hard. Resilient people are really good at choosing carefully where they select their attention. They can actually hone in on what the positive is and deflect some of the negative. So just having that sense, again, remembering to stop and just sort of assess and reflect and think about where you are. and really also focusing on what they can control. I love the question here. What's something I can do today to remind me I'm not helpless? It sounds like something straight out of a self-help book, and yet I totally love it, because I think especially in times like this, it's so important to be thinking about when all of these things are happening and we want to make the world a better place and we want to have a big impact, and we want to be good at our jobs and we want to be good parents and good partners and all of those sorts of things. Just saying, what's something today that I can do to remind me that I'm not helpless? What's the one thing that I can actually control? Is really important. And then the last one, resilient people ask themselves, is what I'm doing helping or harming me? She tells a very personal story about looking at pictures of her daughter, and it was actually making her very sad to be looking at pictures. So it wasn't bringing her a sense of connection and joy. She was really feeling like she was really hurting herself. And so she shifted energy away and she said, I'm not going to look at the pictures right now. So she just in the moment said, is what I'm helping or harming me? It's harming me, and I'm going to put it away. I think this one's really powerful. I'm a total doom scroller. I'm trying really hard not to be, but doom scrolling for me is like the opposite of this, right? Like if I have anxiety and I'm not sleeping at 2:00 in the morning, the last thing that I should be doing is reading the New York Times on my phone. It's the last thing I should be doing. I should be doing a million other things that have to do with generating some sense of inner peace and calm, not that, right? So I think having the ability, you can see I'm still working on developing my own resilience. Having the ability to just say in the moment, is what I'm doing helping or harming me, is really powerful. All right, we're gonna wrap up with an exercise. And again, I'm just gonna give you a minute to do this. It is such a simple exercise. I originally started using it in the context of change management training many years ago, and now have been using it in the context of this. And so I just want you to think about a few things. So there's 3 circles here: concern, influence, and control. The control circle is by design the smallest. I want you to make a list of all of the concerns that you currently have. I know we don't have enough time for them in your brain or on paper or on your computer. I get it. Just make a list of a few. I then want you to put an I next to the concerns that you can influence. So what are the concerns that you have in your life that you can influence? What's something you can actually have an impact on? And then I want you to put a C next to the concerns that you can actually control. And when I say control, I mean control. Start to finish, get it done. I'm doing this at this time. It will be done. Control. Not surprisingly, when people go through this exercise, and I'm sure you're already there, our list of concerns is great. The things we can influence, maybe there are a few. The things we can actually truly control is very, very short. So why I really like this exercise is it is a really good in the moment reminder. I have done this when I feel like my work list, for example, is coming up against my personal list. I have like my life admin list and my work list. And when they start to go against each other, I have done this exercise before. And what I've actually come up with has been, maybe there's one thing I can control on my life admin side. I can enroll my daughter in school. For the next 2 minutes, I can spend time on this website. And from a work perspective, I can control the fact that I'm going to get my inbox down to X number, right? I'm going to respond to X number of emails, whatever the case may be. For me, it brings me a sense of just inner peace for a few minutes, because I realize a couple of things. One, there's not a lot I can control, but almost always there's something that I can control. And then in terms of the influence sphere, some things are worth putting energy into influencing, and some things frankly aren't. And why I think this is important for a lot of us is a lot of us overextend ourselves and want to have a powerful impact on our organizations, for example. What that sometimes means is we feel like we have to be present in every meeting, right? We feel like we have to be in front and doing and contributing. And having the ability to just say, these are the ones I can actually have an influence on. I can move the dial in my organization in these ways versus not, I think can be quite meaningful. I do want to talk about Brightcove for just a minute. Folks, a couple of the folks that I work with at Brightcove now know that I love Brightcove. If anybody wants to talk about how much they love Brightcove or want to love Brightcove, find me, because I can't say enough wonderful things about Brightcove. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to work. And it's full of really engaging, smart people who want to make the world a great place. And I can't think of a better work environment to do this type of work in. So we are doing some things at Brightcove. Some of them started before I joined in September. A lot of them have continued, and then there have been some additions. And some of the things that we've been doing really get down to basics about human connection. So some of your companies are probably doing something similar, but our leadership team has really done a tremendous job about communicating. We have meetings that didn't used to exist. We have frequent emails that come out from our leadership team and beyond that really get important discussions going. We did burnout and resilience training, somewhat similar to what you all just went through for everybody, all the people managers at our company. And then we also created a version for our individual contributors so that everybody would have access to some of these tools. We implemented half-day Fridays, and they were for the summer, and we decided to extend them until our offices reopen, most likely later in the year. And the half-day Fridays have been really important for folks to be able to just have the excuse to unplug. Some folks choose to work. Some people choose to catch up on work, but a lot of us will just shut their meetings off and go do something with their kids, or go take a bike ride, or go do something for themselves, which has been really, we've gotten some amazing feedback around doing that, and I don't see it stopping. We also partnered with a really interesting company called Healthy Minds Innovations. I implore you to check them out. They are another research-based organization from the University of Wisconsin, and we partnered with them to actually provide some wellness initiatives for our employees. So they basically do a 30-day challenge, and you can participate in a whole host of different activities like meditation and reflection and ways to basically calm and center yourself. We have a global employee assistance program that we've done a good job of just making sure everybody knows exists and really trying to promote that, because oftentimes in organizations, they're there, but people don't know that they're there and they don't know how to use them. And then the last thing that we did that has also been really meaningful is we gave $500 to every employee to just make their workspace work for them. And they could use it for any office equipment that would make their work life comfortable. And that really went a long way. We give it to our new hires as well. And it's a really good way, we have found, to let people know, hey, see you. We recognize that you're working from home and that everybody has different circumstances, right? Some people have an office, some people have a kitchen table, some people have a closet, whatever the case may be, right? We're all working in different places, but we want your work life to be as comfortable and as productive as possible. I'm going to leave you with a quote from one of my absolute very favorite gems, Maya Angelou. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. I think the power of all of us in deepening our resilience is there. I think if I have learned anything in the last year, it's that we are such a strong group of people who I think have been able to tackle and do more than we probably ever thought we could. And I think that we have a real opportunity now to think about what are all the things that we have learned, what are all the things we still need to learn, and then what are all the ways that we can apply that to make our work lives good, to make our organizations better, to make our lives better. I think there's a really powerful opportunity for all of us. So thank you. This has been so fun.
Here I come. I switched locations. There's a lot of construction that's happening inside my house, and it's very, very loud, and no one would hear me, and it's quieter outside. Sarah, that was incredible. Really, it was could not be better timed. We would like you to do this workshop now every week for the She Geeks Out community. No, but really, really, really appreciate your effort and your clear passion for this. So thank you for that. And thanks again to Brightcove. Really wonderful. I think, Sarah, you're probably going to stick around for a little bit in maybe one of the tables.
Yeah.
So if anybody has any questions, you can absolutely check in with her. We'll wrap up, and I'm gonna just say a few words. First of all, thank you all for coming. I say this every time, and I mean it every time. Without you, we are nothing. So we are definitely stronger together. So please keep coming. Tell your friends. We have another event coming in a month around Career Pivot. I'll just put a link in here. We will get more details in the email, and I adore each and every one of you, and I will see you on some other screen. Thank you again, Sarah.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.